Slippery jack mushroom, Suillus luteus, is the easiest mushroom in amateur cultivation to obtain just before the birch bolete mushroom, with which it is often grown together due to the similar soil conditions it likes. However, both fungi enter into mycorrhiza with other tree species, which is the key to the success of growing wild mushrooms in the garden. From this video you will learn how to create favorable conditions for growing slippery jack in your own garden. How to make a mycelium from slippery jack mushrooms collected in the forest. I will show you a recipe on how to make a soil substrate for growing slippery jack mushrooms yourself. In what conditions it should be grown and how to properly inoculate the mycelium. Which trees are needed for a given species of slippery jack and how to care for the mycelium after application so that it survives in your garden. The slippery jack usually needs pine, while the birch bolete usually needs birch. So if you are just starting your adventure with growing wild mushrooms, start with slippery jack mushroom. The occurrence of slippery jack depends on the phenomenon of mycorrhiza, like a specific symbiosis of plant roots with species of fungi adapted to their needs. It is a process that benefits both parties. Trees can draw more valuable nutrients and water from the ground, and they also gain resistance to many diseases. In return, the fungi receive carbohydrates produced in the process of photosynthesis. Slippery jack is an extremely tasty and highly nutritious forest mushroom. It is characterized by a brown, slightly sticky cap, which is where its species name comes from. It grows from summer to late autumn and is usually found in coniferous forests, most often forming mycorrhizas with pine trees. You can usually find it in pine and mixed forests, in pine thickets and in clearings covered with grasses and young pines, usually in sandy areas, but it has no special preferences for soil. It occurs from May to November. It forms mycorrhiza with various pine species and occurs singly or in large groups. It is one of the most popular and tasty Polish mushrooms. It has a high energy dose and is a good source of protein and carbohydrates. When prepared properly, it becomes a very tasty mushroom. We can distinguish several species of this fungus, and based on its requirements, we can choose the appropriate species that will most likely grow in our garden. For growing mushrooms in your own garden, the most natural habitats will be most beneficial. If our plot contains forest fragments, inoculating the mycelium will certainly bring results. However, in the case of a typical urban plot, when the garden was established from the beginning, we can try to use a small space for the cultivation of mycelium and plant shrubs, conifers and plants that favor the establishment and growth of the mycelium. Mushrooms, and their individual varieties, need symbiosis with specific tree species to develop. It is preferable when the trees are relatively young, about 5 to 10 years old. Depending on the slippery jack species, the growing conditions and soil conditions will be slightly different. Slippery jack, Suillus luteus, it is very common in Poland. It grows in coniferous forests, mainly under pine trees, because it coexists with their roots, the phenomenon of mycorrhiza. It often occurs in pine thickets. It occurs from May to autumn, but in warm autumn and late winter, large individuals were found in mid-December. Larch bolete, Suillus grevelaceae. It is common in Poland, especially in the mountains. It forms mycorrhiza with larch trees and occurs only under this tree. At the same time, it is the most common species. Suillus bovinus roussel. In Poland, it is a common species, the most common among all slippery jacks. It occurs on dry, sandy soils, under Scots pine, with which it coexists in mycorrhiza. Fruiting bodies appear from July to October. It often grows among heather. Grey slippery jack, Suillus viscidus roussel. It occurs mainly in Europe, where it is quite widely distributed. A terrestrial mushroom that grows only under larch trees. Fruiting bodies appear from July to October. Suillus granulatus roussel. It is widely distributed. It is common in Poland. Fruit bodies grow from May to November, on the ground, under various species of two-needle pines like Scots pine, mountain pine, black pine. It prefers well-lit, sandy and grassy places. It is often found on the edge of forests. Slippery jack, Suillus variegatus Rickhun and Rose. It is common in Poland. Fruiting bodies grow from summer to autumn, in coniferous forests, especially under pine trees, on heaths and in humid places. Wedgemut slippery jack, Suillus placidus. It is rare in Poland. It is on the red list of plants and fungi of Poland. It has a status of R, potentially endangered due to its limited geographical range and small habitat areas. It grows on the ground, mainly under the white pine, less often under the Swiss pine and other five-needle pines. Fruiting bodies appear from July to October. Red-brown slippery jack Suillus culinatus kuntza. It is rare in Poland. It is found mainly under double-needle pine trees, especially Scots pine. Marsh slippery jack, Suillus flavidus. It is widespread in Poland, mainly in the northwest and southeast. It is on the red list of plants and fungi of Poland. A terrestrial mycorrhizal fungus that lives in symbiosis with pines. It occurs in raised and transitional peat bogs, in wet and swampy pine forests with Scots pine and mountain pine. If you want to start growing slippery jack mushrooms, just bring some old, mature, fully developed mushrooms from the forest, which contain the spores of the mushroom. Thanks to which the mushroom spreads, they can even be worm-infested, their spore tubes are important. We take such a mushroom together with the mycelium, with the roots of the mushrooms, which form mycorrhiza with a given tree species. Crush such mushrooms and pour rainwater over them, which must not contain chlorine. Additionally, add yeast and sugar, which provide food and a stimulator for the mycelium. Dissolve a cube of fresh yeast in a glass of warm water. Add 3 tablespoons of sugar and 3 tablespoons of flour, mix and set aside for an hour, then add to the mushrooms. Sugar is a source of food for yeast and flour for mushrooms, and sugar is also a growth stimulator for mycelium. Research conducted by scientists from the Iraqi Journal of Agricultural Sciences in 2013 showed an increase in oyster mushroom yield by 50% after adding yeast. The results showed that yield and biological efficiency increased with increasing yeast extract concentration. Pour a bucket of water over everything and leave it outside for 2 to 3 weeks, covered with a cloth. It must have access to oxygen. Yeasts are single-celled fungi, microorganisms. Yeast extract is added to produce the medium. It is rich in growth factors such as free amino acids, vitamins, and nucleotides, which can significantly increase the specific growth rate, rapid accumulation of biomass. Shorten the growth cycle of multicellular mushrooms, increase production by a minimum of 50%, depending on the mushroom species, there is a greater chance of cultivation success. The ideal yeast for this treatment is the Mycelium pulcherrima strain, but Saccharomyces cerevisiae will also be good and is generally available and cheap. Glucose itself will be the best when it comes to feeding the mushrooms, but the yeast will also break down sucrose. If luck is not on your side and you cannot find slippery jack in the forest, mycelium producers offer specially prepared vaccines containing the so-called live mycorrhizal mycelium. Live mycelial hyphae, ready to immediately colonize the roots. When using purchased mycelium, you can skip the 3-week withdrawal process and apply the mycelium immediately. The best conditions for the development of mycorrhizal fungi are in spring and autumn. And then it is best to use preparations with mycorrhiza. Mycelium can be applied from March to October, but the most appropriate period for mycelium is from June to October, when the fruiting body is fully formed. Then there are the best natural conditions for the dissemination of spores and the application of mycelium. In the case of edible forest mushrooms, it is best to apply in periods when the soil is wet and when the ground temperature exceeds 10 degrees Celsius. Ideal conditions prevail in spring and autumn. For successful cultivation, at least 3 trees of a given species for a specific type of mushroom are needed, with which the mycelial hyphae will be able to enter the mycorrhiza. The more trees, the greater the chance of obtaining a mushroom fruiting body. Dig holes around the tree trunk with a diameter of 30 to 40 centimeters and a depth of 15 centimeters. The holes should be dug at a distance of 0.5 to 5 meters, approx 10 trunk diameters, from the tree trunk. Another important element is a suitable substrate for the development of mycelium. If you are not sure whether your garden meets the appropriate soil conditions, prepare a substrate for its cultivation. Forest mycelium prepared in advance, or if you don't have mushrooms from the forest, you can use the mycelium from the package, mix it with 5 liters of peat, which you can buy in a bag in the store. Preferably fibrous peat, 1 liter of charcoal. Instead of charcoal you can use ash from a fire or a fireplace where only wood was burned. To improve the parameters of the soil structure and to improve air and water conditions, it is worth using an additional 0.5 liter of gypsum and 0.5 liter of vermiculite or perlite. Mushrooms should not be fertilized artificially, and here you need to build an appropriate substrate to nourish the mycelium. Gypsum is here as a source of sulfur. The sulfur content of gypsum is about 18% and the calcium content is about 22%. Gypsum is not a quick-acting fertilizer, but it will be a source of sulfur not only in the year of application, but also in the following year. The use of gypsum does not lead to soil deacidification, which is quite important when growing mushrooms. Changes in the pH value after applying plaster are usually small. Additionally, the use of gypsum reduces the content of exchangeable aluminum in the soil, which is harmful to plants and fungi and is present in highly acidified soils. The beneficial effect of gypsum is the formation of aluminum and sulfur compounds in the form of sulfates in the soil. We moisten the prepared substrate until it becomes a paste. With trees such as pine, spruce, and larch, we can count on a slippery jack crop. It is advantageous when the trees are relatively young. As a substrate for a larger area, for better cultivation success, you can use ready-made garden soil with a high content of peat and coniferous sawdust in a 5:1 ratio. Next, dig a few small holes around the tree, preferably so that the roots are visible. Pour in about 0.5 liters of previously prepared substrate and cover with a 5 cm layer of soil. The whole thing should be beaten thoroughly. The younger the tree, the closer you need to apply the mycelium. Water the application site thoroughly, 1 bucket of water around each hole. The sowing site should be covered with a layer of bark, leaves, moss or twigs, preferably straight from the forest, but store-bought bark from a bag will work, as it often also contains spores of like morel. A good practice is to pour a sugar solution at the place where the mycelium is applied, which has a positive effect on the development of fungi. It is a kind of fertilizer for mushrooms that improves and increases their development and multiplication. Prepare it with 10 grams of sugar and 10 liters of water, add a cube of yeast and set aside for 2 hours. Then we water the soil with the solution. From time to time, the plantation can be watered with a small amount of water, especially if there has been no rainfall for 2 weeks. During the fruiting period, in the absence of rainfall, it is recommended to moisten the soil periodically. In the case of amateur cultivation of mycorrhizal forest mushrooms under appropriate weather conditions and other factors, you can count on harvests relatively quickly. The optimal temperature for mushrooms is between 18 and 28 degrees Celsius. They can also grow in a slightly cooler environment. However, the minimum temperature is 3.5 degrees Celsius. Mushroom spores are already starting to grow. During the peak season, fast-growing mushrooms are slippery jack mushrooms and bolete mushrooms, even within 1 day, called soft mushrooms. Boletus and bay boletes grow much slower. We have to wait from 1 to 10 days for a representative of these species. You need to be aware that the mycelium, even if it develops well, does not always produce the fruiting bodies we want. It depends on many factors, including those that we have no control over, such as the weather, including temperature. Additionally, in forests, mushrooms are part of an entire complex ecosystem in which many elements interact with each other. Slippery jack is a tasty edible mushroom. It is suitable for stewing, frying, and marinating, and can also be prepared in any way appropriate for mushrooms. The skin of the cap should be removed before consumption. It is sour and difficult to digest. It can be prepared without removing the skin, but the dishes are more appetizing without it, and removing the skin makes it easier to clean the caps of soil, pine needles. In rare cases, there have been symptoms of intolerance of some people to slippery jack, manifested by vomiting and diarrhea. For this reason, it is advisable to try consuming only a small amount before consuming slippery jack for the first time.